What's going on, everybody, and welcome back once again to the channel. Before we get into today's video, make sure to subscribe and slash that like button if you haven't already. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing a different kind of a video. I am going to be giving a review of the 2014 Kansas City Chiefs, one of the strangest teams in recent memory in the NFL, in my opinion. I followed this team closely at the time. I'm a Chiefs fan, and I remember I was younger, but I remember watching almost every single game that year in 2014. And I'm going to break it down to you why this is one of the most strange teams in NFL history and certain fun facts about them that you would just not be able to believe. So, first I'm just going to go quickly through their season, and then I'm going to kind of go through some of the weird things. So, week 1, they played the Tennessee Titans and wound up losing to the Titans 26-10. It was a rough way to open up the season at home. Derek Johnson broke his arm, out for the year. That was like a tough way to start. Following week, I remember playing the Broncos. They hung in there, but they eventually anyway lost 24-17, and at that point, they were 0-2. Then they bounced back, get a nice win against the Dolphins, and hit 1-2. Then they had the Patriots on Monday Night Football. The Patriots, who went into that game, I believe, at 2-1, and the Patriots were very much a top tier team in the NFL at that point. And, the Chiefs really were not expected to win that game, yet alone do what they did. They beat the Patriots 41-14 and basically made Tom Brady get benched for Jimmy Garoppolo. Tom Brady in that game threw a total of fumbles. Brady had a rough day. And if you remember, that phrase that Bill Belichick said, that famous quote of his, he said after a beatdown of a game, he said, "On to Cincinnati." That was the game that he said that. After the Chiefs blew them out, he said, "On to Cincinnati." And as we all know, the Patriots went on to win the Super Bowl that year. So that became a huge thing. Like, oh man, they just came off of that rough loss, and he says, "On to Cincinnati," and they go on and win a Super Bowl. So, yeah, and, that was the year they beat Seattle. But that's besides the point. But the Chiefs just completely demolished them in that game. Alex Smith had one of his best games of the season. He went for 20 of 26 for 248 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. It was also Jamal Charles' return after missing a few games. Jamal Charles scored a couple of touchdowns. And the Chiefs, they jumped out to a 27-0 lead, and the Patriots then made it 27-7. Chiefs then made it 41-7, and then Jimmy Garoppolo came in and threw a garbage time touchdown to Rob Gronkowski. But the Chiefs just dominated the game in all phases of the game: turnovers, yards, time of possession, first downs. The Chiefs completely demolished the Patriots. Moving on, though, the Chiefs are now at 2-2. They're heading to play the 49ers in San Francisco in a grudge match. Alex Smith playing his former team, the team that got rid of him, the team that he had done so much for, that had gotten rid of him for quarterback Colin Kaepernick. This game that I really remember was being pumped up for this game. It was a revenge game for Alex Smith, and I was a bit of a 49ers fan when Alex Smith was there. I liked that team. So, I really just wanted the Chiefs to be able to beat them. And they wound up losing the game in the worst possible way, losing 22-17 in a game in which the Chiefs offense struggled, and Alex Smith threw a game-losing interception, and it was just such a tough one to swallow. So then, just like that, the team snapped back down to earth at 2-3, and then they have a bye week, an early bye week. So after the bye week, they play the Chargers. They beat the Chargers in a thrilling game to get to 3-3, and this is when they start to hit their stride. They beat the Rams, get to 4-3. They blew out the Rams. Then they beat the Jets to get to 5-3. Then they play the Bills in week 10. And I actually went to this game. I was at this game, and it was a really strange game where the Chiefs got off to a pretty bad, very slow start. It was 10-3, which the Bills were just dominating the game for the most part. And, then it was 13-3, and then the Chiefs wound up winning at 17-13 in a low-scoring defensive battle. And that's when it really started to feel like, okay, this team's for real. They're 6-3, they've won 4 in a row, and they can win in all kinds of ways, defensively, offensively. Then the next game, they play Seattle. the defending Super Bowl champions at the time. And I remember leading up into this week, everyone saying the Chiefs had no shot at winning. Everyone thought they were just a fluky team and that Seattle was going to walk over them. The Chiefs dominated the Seattle offense in that game early in the second half. The game was 14-13 at halftime and scoring one touchdown the rest of the game. In the second half, the Chiefs offense the Chiefs defense completely shut down Seattle, and Seattle had been on a roll that year offensively, and they came out, that was coming off their Super Bowl year, but the Chiefs were just winning in all sorts of ways. But have you known, up to this point, the Chiefs had not had a touchdown to a wide receiver, but their defense had not allowed a rushing touchdown yet that season. So we then move on to the Raiders. They're 7-3. They're playing the Raiders. The Raiders were 1-10. The Raiders were 0-10. Excuse me. The Raiders were 0-10, and they had rookie quarterback Derek Carr, who now is still the quarterback of the Raiders. But it was Derek Carr's rookie year, and they were 0-10. The Chiefs were going in there Thursday night, big time matchup. Chiefs were getting dominated early on. They were down 14-3 at one point, and they wound up losing the game 24-20 in heartbreaking fashion, and to drop to 7-4. And I remember that game, and it was a game that they actually then took. After being down 14-3, they took the lead 21-20, or made it. They made it 20. Excuse me. They took the lead 20-17. But wound up losing anyway, and it was just a very tough loss, losing to the winless Raiders like that. And then the next week they had a big-time divisional matchup against the Broncos. They were 7-4. This was their only shot to be able to keep pace for the division. Broncos pretty much dominated them 29-16. It was never really a close game after the Broncos jumped out to a 17-0 lead after the first quarter. Then they play the Cardinals. They were beating the Cardinals 14-9, and about to make it 21-9. They scored a touchdown that got called back over a controversial offensive pass interference call on tight end Anthony Fasano, and the Chiefs wound up then losing that one 17-14. And then they played the Raiders again, revenge of that one, of the one from a few weeks prior. They beat the Raiders 31-13, proving that they were the better team, and that game was a fluke. They go to Pittsburgh after that, lose 20-12. Later it's discovered Alex Smith got injured and would be out for the final game. And then in the final game of the year, they needed to win, and then they needed the Jaguars to beat the Texans and for the Browns to beat the Ravens in order to make the playoffs. And at some point during that, all three games were 1 o'clock window games. And at one point during that window, I remember I was freaking out. The Chiefs were beating the Chargers 19-7. The Browns were beating the Ravens 10-3, and the Jaguars were beating the Texans 17-14. All three things that needed to happen were happening for the Chiefs, and I remember I was so excited yet so nervous at the same time. The Chiefs wound up holding on, winning 19-7, but the Texans wound up beating the Jaguars, and it was a very controversial ending where the Jaguars almost had a late touchdown, but it was out of bounds. And then the Browns wound up losing to the Ravens, and the Chiefs wound up missing the playoffs. Now, this was obviously a very up and down year for the Kansas City Chiefs, a 9-7 season in which they had at one point a 5-game winning streak, yet a 3-game losing streak ahead of it. Now, let me put this in perspective, how the Chiefs, they didn't make the playoffs. They had a total net points of 107. Net points is the amount of points the amount of points you score in subtraction to the amount of points you allow in total throughout a whole season. So they scored 107 more points in total than their opponents. The Carolina Panthers in that same year in the other conference had negative 137 net points, yet they made the playoffs. The Panthers went 7-9. The Chiefs went 9-7. The Chiefs had a better record by 2 games and more net points by a total of 244. And yet the Panthers are and the Chiefs weren't. And that's just, circumstances of the conference. And there's plenty more examples of how the Chiefs, that Chiefs team was a lot better than a lot of playoff teams. And, it was just such a shame, I remember, to see that team not in the playoffs. So now let me get into the strange statistics, because that leads me to my next point. I don't know, I couldn't really find this stat online, but if one of you can find it, let me know. But I think the Chiefs that year in 2014 may have been one of the only teams in NFL history to beat both teams that contended in the Super Bowl that year and not make the playoffs. Yes, the Chiefs did not make the playoffs that year, but they beat both teams that were in the Super Bowl that year, in the Patriots and the Seahawks. The Patriots, they beat 41-14, as we talked about earlier, and the Seahawks, they beat 24-20. They beat both of them, yet did not make the playoffs. How bizarre is that? And it just added to the frustration yet optimism for the next year. Another insane stat is the Chiefs' defense in 2014 did not allow a single rushing touchdown all the way until week 12. Week 12. Think about that. They went 10 games without allowing a single rushing touchdown. That is astonishing. That is just amazing. And then the other, somewhat negative statistic of it all is that they went the entire season without having a touchdown to a wide receiver. There were so many close moments, but they never had a touchdown to a wide receiver. And it was the first team that had not had a touchdown to a wide receiver since 1961 or early 1960s. That in itself is insane. It's two. So when you put it all together, this is one of the most strange teams in NFL history. They didn't allow a rushing touchdown until week 12. They didn't have a touchdown on offense, to a wide receiver until the entire year. They didn't make the playoffs, yet they beat both teams that were in the Super Bowl that season. They had 107 net points, which should usually is an indicator of making the playoffs, yet they didn't make it. This Chiefs team was so strange, and the strangeness almost even carried on to next year, where they were the second team in NFL history to start off 1-5 and make the playoffs, because they made the playoffs at 11-5. But focusing on 2014, it was just such a shame to not see this team make the playoffs, because they beat a lot of great teams that season. Like I said, they beat the Patriots, they beat the Seahawks, but they beat a lot of other solid teams that they were better than, and those teams made it in the playoffs simply because just circumstances. But if you're curious about some of the stats for some of the key players on the Chiefs that year, quarterback Alex Smith threw for 18 touchdown passes to just 6 interceptions that year, and had a QB rating of 93.4. That's not a season that jumps out at you, but it's not bad. It's a solid season, obviously. That season wasn't Travis Kelce's rookie year. His rookie year was 2013, but he didn't play a single down in 2013 due to an injury. So this was his first, real season starting, and in that season, he had 67 catches for 862 yards. He had a heck of a first year as a starter, and it's the only year in his career which he started that he didn't make the Pro Bowl, and that may have just been kind of, an under the radar kind of he was under the radar, not well known yet, and that might have been part of the reason. And then the other one is Justin Houston. Justin Houston that season had 22 sacks that year. He went to the Pro Bowl that year, obviously, and was a first-team All-Pro. He came literally just half a sack away from tying Michael Strahan's record and official record. So, he came very close there too. And then another astonishing fact about this Chiefs team, this one in particularly about their defense, which just makes it all the more saddening that they did not make it to the playoffs, is they never allowed 30 points in a game. They were the only team in the NFL that year to not allow 30 points in the game. There was never a game that year, in my opinion, that the Chiefs defense played bad. That Chiefs defense was lights out. In my opinion, it may have been the best defense in the league that year. But, it just didn't work out. It wasn't meant to be for this team. And they only averaged allowing 17.6 points per game, too, to add that in there, which was the best of any Chiefs defense since 1997. So, again, very, very weird and strange year. Comment down below whatever strange seasons that I could cover on the channel, but I wanted to make a video on this because I just felt like it would be cool to make kind of like a throwback video. And comment down below if you want me to do more of these. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Go Chiefs.